6:45 in the morning of June 9th, 1863. Now, one thing very important has happened. The 6th Virginia Cavalry has saved the battle so far. The 6th Virginia Cavalry putting up the defense at Beverly's Ford, Captain Bruce Gibson's company putting that defense up down there. At Flournoy, there was a house here during the war. It stood right on that hill. It was the Mary Emily G. house. She was a farmer. Mary G. was. She had many slaves. And she farmed that property over there. It was a brick house up on top of the hill. That's where the 6th Virginia Cavalry headquarters were. They raced down this road, Beverly's Ford Road, and that's when they hit the 8th Illinois Cavalry. Well, actually first, the 8th New York Cavalry, 8th Illinois, stymied them. So now, nothing speaks more loudly to the Confederate surprise that was incurred here. Nothing speaks more loudly to that surprise than the fact that 16 guns of horse artillery, precious horse artillery, the only thing between them and capture was that little company of the 6th Virginia Cavalry, 60 men. Robert Franklin Beckham, the worthy successor to John Pelham. You'll recall John Pelham, mortally wounded at Kelly's Ford. And Jeb Stuart has never been given enough credit for being a recognizer of raw military talent. And he had observed Robert Franklin Beckham earlier in the war, and he would make the decision. Nobody else would make the decision but General Stuart as to who was going to be the successor to John Pelham. He selected Robert Franklin Beckham, and there was no drop-off whatsoever in talent, no drop-off in performance capability, and no drop-off whatsoever in the love and affection that his men had for him, as they did with John Pelham. So Robert Franklin Beckham did not like, he makes it clear in his report after the battle, he did not like his exposed position, being planted down there by some annoying staff officer. He resisted that, but he left his horses. He turned out some of his horses from the artillery pieces, but he kept his men close by, kept his men in close contact with these artillery pieces. You had 4 batteries down there. Chew's Battery, the original horse artillery battery, the Loudoun County boy. Chew's Battery, McGregor's Battery, Mormon's Battery, and Hart's South Carolina Battery. 16 guns down there in the road. When the Federals attack, Beckham gets his men up. Now, he is born in Culpeper. He is raised in Culpeper. He goes to West Point from Culpeper. He's a Culpeper boy. And he knows ground. So he knows this ground. He knows that he would prefer to get his guns, to get his men back to Fleetwood Hill. He knows that. But he doesn't have the time. He does not have the time because the Yankees are nipping at his heels. And folks, the woods out here in front of us, not this tree line, not the tree line in the center, nor the 3rd tree line. The 4th tree line, all the way in the distance, that's 800 yards from here. There wasn't a single tree out here. Now you can look at this road sketch, and you can see this plateau as it looked. You can see this plateau as it looked. Hold that. You can see it looked as during the battle. Alfred Wove, you see that piece of high ground through the trees?
Yes.
He was standing right there and sketched this, and we'll describe this in just a second when Eric gives his description of the battle. But I want to let you know there were no trees out here. They're charging towards you here. That's the 6th Pennsylvania Cavalry. That's the 6th United States Cavalry. Do you see any trees there? No trees. Well, the Federals pushed the Confederates through those woods, and one Confederate officer described the woods out here, the fighting between the 35th Battalion Virginia Cavalry, the 11th Virginia Cavalry, 7th Virginia Cavalry, 6th Virginia Cavalry, and all of these Federal cavalry regiments, 8th Illinois, 8th New York, that those woods obscured a dark and hellish scene. A lot of men were killed in those woods as they were fighting back and forth in the woods, mounted, not dismounted, mounted as they were falling back through the woods. So finally the Confederates withdrew. Why withdrew? Guess what? I got my artillery here. I don't need to be down there fighting Yankees when I can come here under the cover of guns and let my guns do my talking to you. So what Beckham will do, he'll bring Chew's battery, and he put it over there on that knoll in the distance. That's St. James Church in that tree line. The next battery up is McGregor's battery, Mormon's battery, here where you're standing, and on the hill, the South Carolina battery of James Hart. So the Federals now will start to charge. But let me back up for just a second. If there's any piece of ground in American history and on this battlefield that is by definition sacrosanct, hallowed ground, defined by where soldiers died in droves, right here, this is it. This piece of ground is hallowed, believe me, folks. And years ago, when this developer bought this property, I met him out here, we stand up here, Lee Samuelson, he had all of his note-taking representatives with him, very earnest young guys, probably Tea Party members, you know, very earnest young guys. So then, he was saying to me, this right here is going to be our entry statement. Our entry statement. We're going to have arches here. And we're going to have fountains going into the air. And up at the top, it's going to say Brandy Downs. And he says, what do you think about that? And I says, not much. We don't think very much about it. We people would like to see this battlefield preserved. We don't think very much about it. He says, well, this is going to be my entry statement right here. And we had another point of view. Guess who owns it today? We own it today. We own all of it. We own all of it. Some things, folks, are worth fighting for, and hallowed ground is worth fighting for. Hallowed ground is worth fighting for. Where young men fought and died is worth fighting for. So, St. James Church, the tree line over here in the woods, preservationists, we own this. We gave Christ Episcopal Church in Brandy Station, the successor congregation to St. James, we own that parcel. I think we gave them $1 for it. They were glad to have the dollar. We're glad to have the parcel. We maintain it. And it was built in 1840 by Richard Hoop Cunningham. Who could afford it? He built it. And it had a galley up above for the slaves. Slaves and their plantation owners went to the same church. They're buried in the same graveyard over here, by the way. And then the war came. The war came. And in December of 1863, the 6th United States Cavalry was camped right here. And a soldier by the name of Lewis Henry Carpenter, his regiment will take the church apart for bricks. Take it apart for building hut sites. He's not proud of it, but they take it apart for bricks. A week before they take it apart, he draws this sketch of the church. He draws this sketch of the church. A week before they take it apart, he signs his name to it. This is St. James Church. This is the only known image of St. James Church. Right here. Okay? St. James, you've never seen that before. This has only recently emerged. The reason that we're very proud of it, this has been in the public venue for about 2 months now. So we're very proud of it. Now, what I'd like to do is to turn this over to Eric, who's going to give you a description of the cavalry charge here, which Woad wrote about, and which appeared in the July 4th edition of Harper's Weekly. And the New York Times wrote a headline article about this. New York Times, of course, everything we believe there. They called it the greatest charge of the war. June 11th, 1863 edition of the New York Times. There you are. Eric, please.
Thank you. Before I do, I got something I want to do, and he's going to hate this because he's way too modest, but it's important to note, and Bud keeps talking about the fact that we own this battlefield. And I'm going to tell you, if it wasn't for this man right here, it wouldn't have happened. This battlefield is his legacy. The morning of June 9, 1863, John Buford, not knowing exactly what lay ahead of him here, but knowing there was Confederate cavalry in this area, will send a courier to Major Robert Morris, Jr., the commander of the detachment of the 6th Pennsylvania Cavalry, that was assigned to the Reserve Brigade. There were 5 companies of the 6th Pennsylvania here that day. 2 of them were assigned to headquarters duty with the Army of the Potomac. The rest were not present. So there's only 5 companies, less than half a regiment. Major Morris is the ranking officer. The colonel of the regiment had resigned his commission in April of '63 due to continuing illness contracted during the Mexican War that kept flaring back up after the Peninsula Campaign. His name was Richard Henry Rush. He was the great-grandson of Dr. Benjamin Rush, who of course signed the Declaration of Independence. Rush resigns. His regiment turns in the Lancers you heard me talk about earlier. In command here is Major Robert Morris, Jr., the grandson of the financier of the American Revolution. Blue Bloods, Philadelphia Blue Bloods. Now, along with him that day is a staff officer that's been sent from Army of the Potomac headquarters by General Hooker to keep an eye on things, sort of as a spy. That young man's name was Captain Ulrich Dahlgren. And Ulrich Dahlgren, being the sort of fellow that he was, will end up joining in what will take place. But Buford will send a courier to Major Morris that said, General Buford sends his compliments to Major Morris and directs him to clear the woods in front. The woods being this area back here by St. James Church. So the 5 companies of the 6th Pennsylvania Cavalry will form up in the wood line. Once they form their line of battle, they'll begin to move forward. First at a walk, then at a trot. They will draw their sabers. Major Morris will order them to gallop, and finally they'll come at the charge. They're going to come thundering across this field that you see in front of us. Now, this line of trees along the irrigation ditch down here is basically what it is, was not here. So this field was wide open. There was nothing between here and the distant tree line. And as the men of the 6th Pennsylvania come across, they come across with what was, you heard Bud mention, described by one of the Confederate horse artillerists as a charge of conspicuous gallantry, as it was called. The performance of the 6th Pennsylvania Cavalry here that day so impressed John Buford. Now remember, this is a crusty old regular soldier. And a crusty old regular soldier who had very little tolerance for anything that he considered to be frivolous, irrelevant. He wasn't terribly fond of the volunteer regiments. He specifically asked to be put in charge of the regulars. The charge of the 6th Pennsylvania here so impressed John Buford that from this day forward, for the rest of his life, he called them my 7th regulars. So that should tell you something. They come across this field taking artillery shots all the way from this Confederate horse artillery. And Bud pointed out to you the configuration of the batteries here on this ridge line. Shell and shrapnel tearing holes in their ranks as they charge across the field. This is one of the gunners of Hart's battery. When within 200 yards of us in the guns-to-use canister, Lieutenant Colonel Elijah V. White, commanding a small detachment of Virginia cavalry, led his 35th Battalion between our guns and the enemy and gallantly charged into them. Our fire ceased instantly, and with nothing else in their way, the charging column rolled back White's little force as if it was a wisp of straw and thundered on. When within 20 yards of the guns, double-shotted with canister, we delivered their last fire into the mass of Federals and Virginians alike, but it was now too late to stop them. Major Morris will have his horse shot out from him, and his horse will go down on the other side of the ditch out here and trapped Morris underneath the animal. So he will end up being captured, and he will die a lonely, miserable death in Libby Prison in August of 1863 of disease contracted. He was so respected by both sides, and even the Confederates, that his death was, and a little obituary was published in the Richmond newspapers. So that should tell you the respect this officer was held in. You heard Bud talk earlier about Major Henry Whelan. Whelan is the ranking officer now of the 6th Pennsylvania. He says, "We had to leap 3 wide ditches, and many of our horses and men piled up in a writhing mass in those ditches and were ridden over. It was here that Major Morris's horse fell badly with him and broke away from him when he got up, thus leaving him dismounted and bruised by the fall. I didn't know that Morris was not with us, and we dashed on, driving the rebels into and through the woods. Our men fighting with the saber alone whilst they used principally pistols. Our brave fellows cut them out of the saddle and fought them like tigers until I discovered they were on both flanks, pouring a crossfire of carbines and pistols on us, and then tried to rally my men and make them return the fire with their carbines. Now keep in mind, you see the road over there that we took to get to the last stop. Grumble Jones's brigade is arrayed along that road. Hampton's troopers over here. So as the 6th Pennsylvania is making its charge, they're taking flanking fire from both sides. And they're making this mounted charge, running a gauntlet, charging directly into the muzzles of cannons, much like the charge of the Light Brigade at the Battle of Balaclava in 1854. Ulrich Dahlgren, seeing Major Morris go down, will actually end up being the one to rally the Lancers' troopers and to lead them back to safety. But these guys are going to make it all the way to the muzzles of these Confederate cannons and actually get a little bit past them before they're ultimately repulsed and fall back. They have no support, and there's nothing to keep them in place, so they have no choice but eventually to be driven back and to fall back. Private Henry Cowan of Company K made the charge. This is his account. Taking them by surprise, we drove their center and continued on without pulling up until we arrived in front of their battery, where they opened with canister which cut us terribly. It was at this point that the rebel brigade closed in on us from the right and left when the fighting was terrific. Cowan himself had a close call. In the engagement, I saw a rebel making a cut at me with his saber. Not being fully prepared to receive it, I wheeled my horse when he struck him on the head and staggered him, but a load from my carbine sent him to his long home. It was an awful scene. Men falling, horses falling. It was a charge of conspicuous gallantry.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much. The 6th U.S. Cavalry was commanded by Clarence Cram. He was an interesting officer. He'd just been released from Libby Prison. And as, you can't see it from here, but there's a knoll behind here. And as he comes up over that knoll, he sees his lead squadron, 2 companies, heading in the direction of these guns. The 6th U.S. Cavalry, he wants no part of being back in Libby Prison. Captain Cram does, and he hangs back here. But for whatever reason, an element of the 35th Battalion Virginia Cavalry just takes it upon themselves. Eric said that they were along Greens Mill Road. Well, the 35th Virginia Battalion, Loudoun County, and Marylanders, they come across this open ground. There's less than 200 men in that little regiment. Less than 200 men. They come across, they leap into the back of this squadron. It's going up the hill on the other side. Going up the hill to attack Hart's gun. What happens next is one of those incidents that falls under the criteria fog of war. Fog of war. Because as the 35th Battalion Virginia Cavalry goes up that hill, behind that squadron of the 6th U.S. trying to keep them away from the guns, what do the Confederate gunners do? They open up. They open up on both the 6th U.S. Cavalry and the 35th Battalion Virginia Cavalry. Hart doesn't apologize for it in his report. Elijah White, who commands the 35th Battalion Virginia Cavalry, doesn't make an issue out of it, because a gunner is going to protect his guns, no matter what. So this regiment, which is not a big regiment to begin with, will lose 90 men in this battle. A 200-man regiment will lose 90 men in this battle. And I would submit to you, a lot of those casualties were right there on that little knoll you're looking at. Now, we fought the county hard. Back when this property was rezoned, we fought the county hard to keep that site open. They wanted to put a fuel farm up there for their aircraft. Put a big fuel farm with tanks and all that right up there. And we went to war with them over that. You own it, okay? But we don't want to stand here on our battlefield and look at your fuel farm. You don't see a fuel farm up there today, do you? But you don't also see access up there. They keep us out of there. That's their way of getting back at us. So we don't go up there. As I said, I wrote them a letter. We've lost that to history, that's yours. But over here, this is hallowed ground. And we're going to keep it. And everything else, we're going to keep.
It bears noting, by the way, that Captain Cram ended up back in Libby prison.
Yes, he did.
He was captured at the Battle of Fairfield outside of Gettysburg on July 3rd. So it only took him, an extra, not quite a month to find his way back to Libby prison once again.
And Major Morris, who commanded these men, as Eric has pointed out, Major Morris was described by one of his officers as he became a good officer once he realized other men were his equals. Tells you a little something about him. He would die in Libby prison of, it is reported, malnutrition, but his mate said he died actually of a broken heart. Proud man. Okay, thank you fellas enormously. Thanks for being here. Todd, everybody, thank you very much.
One quick last note about Major Morris, and it bears noting. There is a company of cavalry that was formed to be George Washington's bodyguard. It is called the 1st Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry, otherwise known as the 1st City Troop. The original commander of the 1st City Troop was Captain Samuel Morris, who was a cousin of Robert Morris. Morrises, including Robert Morris Jr., have served with the 1st City Troop from its very beginning until the present day. There are members of the Morris family who are still on active duty with the 1st City Troop. Robert Morris Jr. was the 1st Sergeant of the 1st City Troop, and a bunch of the officers of the 6th Pennsylvania Cavalry ended up being selected specifically from the 1st City Troop, and it holds Company E of the 6th Pennsylvania is considered to be a direct forebear of the 1st City Troop. So this is a unit that really relates itself all the way back to the American Revolution.
Nice story, Eric.